Hi, Jonah.
Hi, Ann.
Nice to talk to you again.
Nice to talk to you, although no one knows that we talked the first time because of technical...
Well, I think I complained about it on the blog, so some of my readers know that I had a little problem like that.
Yeah.
But we did this whole great blogging heads, and then it was lost, except for my side of it is preserved, so...
For posterity, because historians are going to be desperate to know that half of the conversation.
Well, there's some wonderful parts where I'm just rolling my eyes, and I was watching it and wondering what were you saying when I rolled my eyes like that? Because I can roll my eyes, but I usually don't roll them all the way around, but like I did that time. So I don't know what you said. Hopefully you'll say something equally outrageous.
I'll give you plenty of opportunities to roll your eyes again, I'm sure. And my apologies to viewers for holding a phone, by the way. My apologies to viewers for holding a phone in my hand. I do not have the requisite brain implant thing to talk freely, so...
Okay, well, we were at a conference together last week. It seemed to be some sort of a right-wing cocoon that was very strange for me. So, what's the deal with the right-wing conspiracy, Jonah?
Well, I don't think it was a conspiracy. It's called the Liberty Fund. It's a pretty academic thing. If you look at their catalog of seminars, they do seminars on Jane Austen and Shakespeare, and they have an emphasis on freedom. They take freedom pretty seriously, so there's a lot of seminars that have to do with Hayek and Adam Smith and that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're very lofty and beautifully done. They invite, how many of us were there, 16 or 17
I think 16,
people?
yeah, and I think it's a pretty rigid formula. 16 people, the seminars start according to a schedule that they do for all of them because they've sort of worked out how to do these things right, at least as far as they're concerned.
Right. And we sit around a hollow table so I guess it's like 4 on each leg.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's part of what seems a little cult-like. You have to admit, once you start having a lot of rules like that, even if they're good rules and they lead to a good format, it's sort of like when you start hearing about the rules and the formalism of it, there's something about that that's a little... I think it's fine. It's a little club-like. It's okay. It's a little cult-like. But
cult-like strikes me as a... You don't think cult-like is...
Is that a good thing?
No, but it doesn't the word cult-like strike you as just maybe perhaps a bit too harsh for...
Cult-like. I didn't say it was a cult. I said that some of the rules were cult-like.
I see.
Like we went to a restaurant on the last night.
Right.
And they had a long table set up. And that was not acceptable. There had to be 3 separate tables because there was a rule that you couldn't have more than, I think it was 5 or 6 people at one table.
Right, to facilitate conversation.
It's actually a good rule, but we had to then leave and make them re-set up the tables, and because it wasn't just that this is the best way to do it, it was that we have to follow the fund's rules, right?
Sure.
So there was an element of that, which is fine, and I'm not knocking that, and I think they do a great job of getting a lot of people together to talk about something, and we're given 400 or so pages of readings, serious readings to do. You have to prepare.
Yeah.
And you have to participate.
Yeah.
So it's a little like law school, And there is even a leader that it's a little Socratic. It was a lot like law school in a way, which is a cult, speaking of cults.
Okay. Well, if you have that expansive a definition of cult,
I'm including law school.
Fair enough.
When conducted according to there are cult-like things about law school. If you feel you should follow the Socratic method, and there's certain, you have a text and you meet and you talk about it in a certain way, and there's certain rules. Usually in law school we don't follow the high style, so we've sort of fallen away from the grand tradition.
Okay. So,
but what we were talking about, not Shakespeare or Jane Austen, but a guy who is fundamental to your organization, the National Review, named Frank S. Meyer, who was around in the 50s and 60s writing some, I think, rather incendiary articles opposing civil rights and school desegregation. Among other things, he was inciting all of the governors to take back the National Guard, to make them militias again, and to oppose that evil demon Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was up to his horrible collectivist plot to desegregate the schools in the South. That's pretty alarming. We were reading a lot of high-flown, abstract philosophy from the man, but it really jumped out at me that he was into some awfully alarming ideas.
Yeah, I think historically, in hindsight, he was simply wrong about all of that, and I don't think there was actually anybody in the room, libertarian or conservative, who was actually defending those positions sort of on the merits in terms of the historical context.
Right.
There were a lot of people like myself who, wishes that we could have grown up in some parallel universe where we could argue about states' rights without having the monumental issue of Jim Crow and slavery and civil rights get in the way of the principle.
I agree.
And because, there's I think most conservatives today, certainly all the conservatives at National Review, would simply stipulate in one way or another that civil rights and the legacy of slavery and all the rest is the great exception. It is this example of where it was right for the federal government to intervene. Where conservatives will disagree, or where conservatives would object, is to the way liberals use that precedent to justify, therefore, the meddling of the federal government on a host of issues that have nothing to do with Jim Crow and slavery.
And, I write about federalism as a law professor, and I'm interested in it, and I've taken it seriously, and I take the structural parts of the Constitution seriously. But a problem that I always have as I go about in my normal milieu in law school area is that people assume that if you think federalism is valuable, then you're tainted with this racial problem. And obviously, this is the big story in the history of the United States: slavery, segregation, the civil rights movement, and so on. You need to be on the right side of history for that. And if you have a political philosophy that is connected with the wrong side of that, it's not enough to say, well, of course that was bad, but the ideas are still good and I love them. You have to find a way to say that the ideas are good in a way that can be disaggregated from that. You need to get the stink of that off of you. If you want to talk about those ideas and talk about them in an abstract way, the way so many people, everybody but me at the conference wanted to do, it seemed, it's not enough. You have to be proactive. You have to disconnect yourself to the ugly parts of it. Otherwise, it is just a kind of a bizarre clinging to abstract ideas that just doesn't sit right with an ordinary, right-wing person who would actually like to talk about the real world in a pragmatic way. And I was surprised that you opposed me on NRO, because, in fact, the people who were bothering me the most were the libertarians, who were very quick to talk about freedom and autonomy and the least possible government, and they were the ones who were the most wedded and in a death grip with a particular idea, which is the least possible government and economics will solve it all, just have a free market. Because you are on the side of sort of the Burkean style and the tradition and so forth, so it didn't seem to me that you were really about being wedded to an idea. And yet you attacked me for saying I was afraid of the people who were so in love with an idea that they wouldn't look at the real world, and they didn't see the importance of having to disaggregate themselves from the horrible history of slavery and racism in the United States.
And I really think you've piled a lot of question begging and intellectual stolen bases into all of this. I mean, first of all, at the level first of all, we're going to talk about the states' rights thing. I agree that it is necessary as a matter of forensics or rhetoric or whatever that conservatives, if they want to talk about civil rights, if they want to talk about federalism, they have to have an account of the civil rights period and of states' rights and racism and all of the rest. And I talk about federalism. I've talked about federalism on probably 40 college campuses now. I do it all of the time. Kids are not taught about federalism. Often in the Q&A, afterwards they say, your idea about federalism, as if I invented it, as if because they have never been taught it, they don't understand it.
Because it's like a dirty word. It got dirty.
I understand it's a dirty word, but it's a dirty word in part because there are a lot of liberals, statist liberals, who want to use the history of Jim Crow and that period of states' rights, when states' rights meant defending Jim Crow, as an excuse to use the federal government to do whatever they want. And it's a Trojan horse.
I totally agree with you on that. I teach about federalism. I write about federalism in law. We certainly teach about it in law school. Most law professors, I think, underrate the structural parts of constitutional law. I don't. I write about it. I agree with you. But the key thing that needs to be done is that federalism needs to be associated with things that people see in a good way, in a positive light, like what happens if you go with this decentralized decision-making? If what happens is you get segregation and you get a retrograde, backward, not a positive kind of a world, then it's not going to attract enough people to matter. You have to represent it in a way that is positive to people. And for me at the Liberty Fund, for people who it was just key that people needed to talk to the middle. You know, I mean, if it's going to be something that works in the real political world, you have to appeal to people who need to hear about that. It's not enough to say, well, it's an idea that's good anyway. You have to convince people that it's good.
I agree with that entirely, and that's one of the reasons why, I mean, the merit of federalism to me is that it is fundamentally a political compromise. And so for issues where I disagree with liberals on, for example, gay marriage, I am perfectly happy to throw gay marriage back to the states. You have to deal with the full faith and credit clause stuff and all that, that's fine. But there are all sorts of things I personally object to, or politically object to, that if they were just thrown back to be states' rights issues, I would have no problem with, including things like abortion, euthanasia, and all of the rest. But now, when you say I attacked you...
Although I should say I actually don't want Roe v. Wade overturned, but I'm not... I was at a conference a couple of months ago about what would happen if Roe v. Wade were overturned, and there was a lot of alarmism about how terrible things would be if it was returned to the states and so forth. And, you know, I think that is being overstated. But that said, I still think it should be a constitutional right. But I think that people are acting alarmist about returning things to the states, and I think there are positive aspects to that.
Yeah, but now, so to move to the second part of your recent...
My tirade.
Yeah, well, you said, I attacked you. I don't think what I wrote was an attack. What I did object to, and I still object to... I'm sorry. Oh, it was odd. I think it is odd.
You called me odd. Is that not an attack?
You know, your post, if I read it correctly, I don't think even mentioned states' rights or Jim Crow or any of that stuff. Your criticism was of people who believe qua belief, that you object to people who actually, and this is the way I read it, and I've not heard a dissenter from my interpretation of it. And usually when I misread people, I get email from people saying, well, you really read her wrong.
You could have read my post.
Your post was an objection to belief, about people who really believe in things and have certainty.
My objection is to the sort of true believer in the political sphere. If you take it in context what I was saying, I'm not saying I'm against all beliefs. I'm saying I am frightened by people who operate on an intellectual level that's so abstract that they come up with an idea and they fall in love with that idea. And I'm really thinking about the libertarians that were there. And then they don't want to talk about how things play out in the real world. They don't want to have any aspect of pragmatism in what they're saying. And basically, I think those are the fundamentalists and the ideologues. And I am afraid of those people when they get political power. To some extent, I'm not that afraid because I don't think they will get political power, because I think most people are common sense enough and realistic enough that they think it's ugly unless they want to know how it's really going to play out. That's what I was saying before. So I just think that what I'm afraid of are the fundamentalists, the ideologues who fall in love with an idea and lose track of what's really happening in the real world and won't be swayed by it no matter what happens.
Yeah,
and the people who were adhering to free market economics and minimal government in the face of segregation in the South, those people have a big problem, and they are scary. And I stand by that, and I don't think it's odd. I think it's absolutely sound and common sense.
And there's no one who's making that argument now. You're arguing with a bunch of dead people.
No, well, they were walking zombies in the room. Apparently, they were living in. They were pretending to.
Who was defending Jim Crow? Who was saying that the state?
This is why I think you should be more friendly to me, Jonah, because the people who were bugging me were the libertarians. Not you.
And I understand that. I've been fighting with libertarians for my entire pundit career. I agree with you entirely that they're too ideological about things.
Why do you stop fighting with them when it comes time to turn around and fight with me? Why don't you see me as an ally?
And we were in an academic conference, and we were having a conversation that was designed to be abstract. That was the whole endeavor. And I don't believe in building coalitions in these sorts of things. No. I don't recall you picking these grand fights with libertarians, to be honest. And I don't quite.
You went to my table at dinner, John.
I don't quite get. I still don't quite get why. Why you have this sort of this. I think it is odd view that somehow ideology, first of all, equates to rigidness. I mean, ideology is simply a checklist.
It doesn't have to.
The
people I oppose are the ones who are rigidly fundamentalist and doctrinaire on an abstract level. And when it's not intellectual to say, all right, here's a conference where we're going to stay at a very abstract level. And please don't bring up the fact that the guy that we're apparently sitting here celebrating thought the Southern governors should shift the National Guard into a militia and oppose Dwight D. Eisenhower's attempt to desegregate the South. Let's not talk about that, even though it's in the readings. Let's not talk about that. Let's get back up to the abstract level and talk about principle. I don't think it's intellectual to insist on abstraction. I think all the time, I think it's an intellectual move that can be made and that ought to be opposed by people who say, let's look at how that plays out in the real world. Talking about the real world is not failing to be intellectual. And you could say, I didn't stay within the scope of the conference. The conference was designed to be in this narrow scope, and what I was saying was out of bounds. Well, if that's true, then it was a right-wing cocoon, and it was scary.
And you're creating this incredible straw man. I mean, first of all, you say, let's not talk, that everyone was saying, let's not talk about this. Well, as you admit, it was, first of all, in the readings. Second of all, we had an entire hour-long seminar about it, and the point of the seminar was to discuss what Frank Meyer was about, not to discuss, you know, the merits of the actual, you know, it was to understand Frank Meyer's thought.
Yeah, I was trying to understand Frank Meyer.
Nobody in this right-wing cocoon that you keep referring to actually defended Meyer on the pragmatic grounds. They were trying to go to have an argument about the first principle.
But, Jonah, we were essentially celebrating a man who, in his real-world political activity, the things that he wanted at the time when he was writing in the National Review, the things that he wanted are clearly wrong, clearly despicable. If we're going to sit around a table for 9 hours talking about this man, apparently celebrating him, we need to face up to the reality of what his ideas meant for him at the time, and we need to make an effort, if the ideas are to be valuable at all, to disaggregate those ideas from the incredibly ugly things that he connected them to. You can't sit there and celebrate a person when all of that other stuff is going on. And you can't say, well, let's be intellectual and eliminate all that static and just talk about the principle. I don't accept that. I think there's something really wrong with doing that.
Well, Ann, I mean, first of all, I was in part of, maybe you just weren't there, I was part of a lot of heated arguments about the states' rights issue that the night before we talked about the states' rights stuff. And there was a lot of, and there was a general consensus about all this. I discussed it with a lot of people. And so maybe you missed some of the conversations
I
missed.
missed some of the conversations.
But what I also find interesting, I mean, I'm not trying to do a Tukoke thing and just sort of turn this around, but I'm writing this book about, you know, about fascism and about progressivism. And what drives me crazy in these intellectual debates, and I'm not referring to you here at all, but what drives me crazy is that conservatives constantly have their own intellectual history tied around them like an albatross, that we must always forgive.
Yes, so untie the albatross. I was inviting you to do it.
There's nobody defending that aspect of Frank Meyer. There's nobody. They're trying to understand it.
I think you needed to be proactive to disaggregate yourself, that it was incumbent upon you to get the stink of segregation and racism off of you.
And I can't be held responsible for how acute your sense of smell is, that you smell this racism in a movement that has totally rejected that aspect of it. I mean, I think it's more your hang-up or the hang-up of liberals who are claiming that this stink is there than it is of any actual stink emanating from us. I mean,
can I shift this a little,
there's
Jonah?
not an event I go to where I'm not forced to and don't anticipate having to apologize or explain or condemn, you know, the alleged racism of the conservative past. What offends me, though, what bothers me greatly, is that while conservatives are constantly having to atone and apologize, you know, National Review led the charge against Trent Lott when he said his idiotic statements about Strom Thurmond. You know, we led that fight.
You should.
I know we should.
You need to atone.
To be brutally honest, I don't need liberals telling me I should. I do not consider liberals to be my racial conscience whatsoever. And is that
so that's what you see? I'm just being a liberal, being the typical liberal.
Because
I'm normally considered a conservative, and all the liberals online hate me. So
yeah, well, that says something about where liberalism today is, and about Madison, Wisconsin.
But see, Jonah, what I'm saying is, why don't you see me as an ally? I am trying to help you. I'm saying that, yeah, I think I'm interested in federalism too. But the important thing is to appeal to people who are not ideologues, who are pragmatic and common sense people, ordinary people, if you want to be successful in the world. And I think that connects to your interest in Burke and in tradition, and makes you different from the libertarians. So instead of fighting with me, I don't see why you don't see this as an invitation to distinguish yourself and to connect with me. Why must we fight,
and I'll tell you why. One, in off-the-record, closed-room debates about abstract political thinkers, I think there is room to avoid playing coalitional politics. Second, I do all of these things that you say that conservatives should do without you lecturing me about how I need to do them. I mean, I don't consider...
But then why, when you talk to me, do you write a post about me and your whole response is that I'm odd because I find ideas scary? Why didn't you reach out to me? Why didn't you talk to me in a way that would have connected to me? And you know, if I can segue over to the subject of Mary Cheney and Andrew Sullivan, you have a post, I think today or yesterday, about the way Andrew Sullivan wrote about you on the subject of Mary Cheney's pregnancy. And you're critical of Andrew Sullivan for being antagonistic and for treating you like that. And yet I feel that you did the same thing to me. Why don't you reach out to me? Why don't you see the ways in which I agree with you? Because that's what you said about Andrew Sullivan and you. So,
and if you think I was being like Andrew Sullivan, then you're being very thin-skinned. I mean, I just simply wasn't.
No, I'm not.
I said your post was odd. I didn't say you were odd. I think anyone who reads that post about you would not consider it an attack.
But you taunted me. I mean, basically, and this is typical blogosphere behavior, and I do it too, to operate by taunting. You see some other sort of high-profile blogger over there, and so you take a shot at them, and then they shoot back at you, and then we all boost our traffic. The rising tide lifts all blogs. And it's a little blogger game, and I know what it is. So I'm not actually thin-skinned about it. I actually play the game myself, but I do think it is a game.
I wasn't playing a game. I was actually offended by the insinuation of that post of yours, which made it sound like you needed to be vigilant about the people in that room. These were all sincere, decent people.
No, I almost called you Andrew. Jonah, what I said was, I usually get criticized in the blogosphere for always attacking people to my left. And that's why the liberals hate me and consider me conservative. I get shots from them all the time. And I said, after going to this Liberty Fund conference, that it gave me more of a sense of what the people to my right are like, and that I want to become more balanced. I'm always noticing these sort of foibles and mistakes and so forth of people on my left, because in my normal life, living in Madison, Wisconsin, for over 20 years, I sort of know what those people are like, and I know how they annoy me, and I have a lot of ideas of ways of responding to them. I have so few right-wing people in my life that they don't annoy me. They're sort of off in the distance. They're an abstraction. And going to the conference, even though it was all talking about abstractions, it made those people more real to me. And what I said I wanted to be more vigilant about had to do with, I want to notice the things that go on to the right of me the way I notice the things that go on to the left of me, so that I can be a better blogger and a more balanced centrist.
And that is all fair enough. It's simply not the way it read to me.
Well, because you didn't read it sympathetic, because you're looking to make an enemy out of me, and I'm saying you should not.
And you're not a mind reader, and you're a bad one. I mean, I'm not looking to make an enemy of you. I mean, I don't get it. I'm not looking to make an enemy of you at all.
I think you need to try harder to be my friend, Jonah.
I think we need to try harder to actually have arguments about the merits, and I think you're taking way too much offense to what I wrote. I really do. And to compare,
I'm not that offended, and I don't mind being called odd. I
didn't call you odd, Ann. That's the fourth time you said that. I said your post was odd. There's a difference. I mean, let's separate. You are not your post. There's a lot more to you than just that one post. I said your post was odd, and I to be honest, I stand by it. But and maybe I will concede that maybe I was actually reading too much Andrew Sullivan into you, because as you may or may not know, in his book, he actually turns this opposition to belief or certainty and ideology into this sweeping metaphysical political program where he says anybody who relies on text, anybody who is too committed to ideas and principles and isn't willing to sort of pragmatically roll through life with a sort of epistemological skepticism, blah, 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 that these people aren't fully formed humans, that they aren't fully formed souls, that they aren't, being good Christians and all of the rest. And I find, in Andrew's case, I find that to be an example of profound philosophical narcissism, because at the end of the day, and hypocrisy.
Also, he doesn't even follow it all the time. He's all certain about a few things himself. So
that's right. I mean, he's absolutely positive about everything that he's absolutely positive on, and anybody else who disagrees with him is ipso facto an ideologue. So maybe I read too much of that into your post, because his war on certainty, which I think is profoundly muddle-headed, was the resonance I was getting off of your post, and that is what I was responding to.
Okay, well, I mean, I have my problems with Andrew Sullivan for the same reason. I mean, I generally would lean in favor of this sort of pragmatic, contextualized attitude toward things. Not that I would, I like principle too, but you can't take it too far. You have to be ready to check your, to make a correction in your course and to notice the effects your ideas are having. And some ideas just don't work out that well in real life, and you have to be ready to back off from them.
I think that's absolutely true.
And to notice the effect things are having.
I
I think the problem with Andrew Sullivan isn't so much that he has that idea, and other than the whole connection of it to Christianity, I don't know about that, but the fact that he backs off from it sometime and is really very over-certain about some things, especially when he attacks religious people.
That's
right.
And
I just raised a little criticism of him once in a post I think was agreeing with him about something else, but I just thought he was, I objected when he put up the photographs of the undergarments of the Mormons as a way of attacking Mitt Romney. I mean, he doesn't like Mitt Romney because Mitt Romney is against gay marriage, and he showed his willingness to fight against Mitt Romney by basically holding Mormons in general up to mockery and offense. And I think that's just a terrible move. Talk about things that history shows. To stir up religious prejudice against religious groups is just such a terrible move. And I criticized him about that. And he came back and really attacked me in a way that he just wrote an incredibly nasty post about me. So I know how you feel about how he wrote about you and Mary Cheney. I don't think he's being very fair, and I'm not trying to be unfair in the same way. I'm trying to be sane and rational, but also get my shots in.
I understand. You want to talk about Mary Cheney?
You want to talk about Mary Cheney?
Sure.
Or are the ideas, do you want to talk about whether we should talk about Mary Cheney, right? Because your idea is that it's just a private matter, we shouldn't talk about it.
Well, it's private enough, my objection to Andrew's thing was that he was assuming that I had some grand agenda to keep people from paying attention to Mary Cheney because of the hypocrisy it would show on the right, and that's really not it at all. I just really, I don't like, and I really disliked it when John Kerry did that whole, your lesbian daughter thing or whatever that was.
He said that, he lowered his voice, he said it in this sort of snarling way. It was just creepy.
Yeah, no, and that has less to do with, I think, John Kerry's meanness or bigotry and more to do with his political stupidity. But regardless, I didn't like it then. I don't like...
Well, I think it's an assumption that the people on the right are actually so homophobic that if you say lesbian, they'll be like, yes, must vote against...
Exactly. It's condescending on across a cascading number of levels. And I don't, I'm hardly shocked that Andrew and this, for want of a better term, the sort of gay left or liberals in general want to make a big deal about Mary Cheney, in part because, the personal is political. There's the sort of alleged hypocrisy of conservatives who are willing to tolerate Mary Cheney but would condemn somebody else and blah, 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 blah. I can't speak for everybody. I have the tire marks on my back from a lot of social conservatives for being in favor of civil unions. I find the old Andrew Sullivan, who made a much more Burkean argument about gay marriage, very persuasive on a lot of points. I don't go as far as he does, but his old argument was that marriage is a civilizing institution. It's folly to deprive people of that institution. He would, especially men. I mean, it's amazing how much gay marriage really ultimately is about men more than it is about women.
Well, I think that there's a big component to this that people believe, with some reason, that women will civilize men and that men unallied to women will be animals.
I think that's right. And, and I think it is, I think Andrew has had a very good point, which I'm just sort of summarizing, which is that in a society, if we're going to tell young men that being gay is terrible, and that male promiscuity is terrible, but we're also going to tell them that any attempt to form stable, loving relationships is terrible. Well, look, you tell men they have two options. They're going to be condemned either way, but option A says they can get laid a lot, and option B says they can't. Men are going to take option A, and they're going to take it in large numbers, and I think it's grotesquely unfair to gay people, assuming, as I do, that in the vast majority of them it is hardwired to some extent, to tell them that they have no avenues to sort of build stable lives, and that's why one of the reasons I'm for civil unions, and the reason I'm for civil unions is because I think it will be the test case for whether or not we can get to gay marriage, and it just takes a little time. Andrew now, says that I am the equivalent of a Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door. He says I'm enabling bigotry by taking I think a humane, moderate, centrist position.
Well, he just got very impatient. I think just in the unfolding of time, gay rights will be a reality, and it's a generational turnover that's necessary.
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
And that's where things are going, if you can just wait it out. I mean, that's the Burkean part of it all, right?
Right.
The tradition will grow, the tradition will change, the trajectory of history is going to go toward gay rights and the acceptance of gay people. And right now, there's just a coalition on the right that includes a lot of people who aren't ready for that at all. And that's a little annoying for people who think it's offensive, but I think you have to live through it and wait for that to develop. But Andrew Sullivan is just, he's out of patience, and he's just very full of fervor and heated up about it.
Yeah, getting back, I know I could talk for a long time about Andrew, because although I've crossed the Rubicon with him, I don't read his blog anymore, and all that. But in terms of Mary Cheney, I don't quite get why people want. It's this heads I win, tails you lose sort of situation where I'm a hypocrite if I don't condemn her, and I'm a bigot if I do condemn her.
Well, it's a political opportunity. You have this. Here's this issue you've been following for just years and years, and then something happens that gives you leverage. It gives you something to play off of. Now, here's a news story. The daughter of the vice president is pregnant, and she's in a lesbian relationship. So, that's just something that happened that it gives you an occasion to make all your old usual arguments. And you want to say, well, nothing's really changed. And it's true, nothing has really changed. It's the same old argument, so why are you bringing it up again? Let's just not talk about it. But why would people on Andrew Sullivan's side agree to that? They've got an event that they can talk about, and then they can throw it in your face that you're not talking about it. They're obviously going to do that and taunt you with it. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I don't...
It's sort of like the way blogging works. Here's a news story today. I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll tell you my usual opinions.
Right.
That's just the way it goes. And, and throwing your name in there and taunting you is a way to get the whole thing afloat and roiling and active again. That's just the way the blogosphere works, I think.
Yeah, although this was the cover of the New Republic.
Cover of the New Republic, but he also links to it on his blog. And
yeah.
He's got the additional leverage of the New Republic. Yeah, I get the New Republic. I saw the picture. Makes her look like it's Christmas time, and her name is Mary, and so the image is of her with the baby looking like the Virgin Mary.
Right.
We're running out of time.
Speaking of the Virgin Mary, you want to move on to Christmas, or?
Well, let's talk about Christmas. Okay.
Okay.
So you believe in the war on Christmas? You think there's a war on Christmas, or do you want to talk about the dangerous toys? Let's talk about a war on Christmas. What do you want to talk about? Dangerous toys or the war on Christmas?
Let's go to dangerous toys. I do believe there's a secularizing push, and that it's symbolized every year in the war on Christmas. But
I think it's overblown. But let's talk about the dangerous toys. There was an article that I thought was pretty cool in Radar. I'll put a link up on the worst toys of all, 10 most dangerous toys of all time, and the number one is lawn darts. But I was especially amused by number 2, which was the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. and I'll put the link up on the web so that you can see that. But basically, you have a little nuclear experiments at home. But I did a blog post about that, and my readers are telling me that actually the U-238 ore is about as radioactive as your granite kitchen counter or your brick house. So that if you think that's so upsetting, that just shows how little you understand about science. So I think that people think that those are the dangerous toys, think that, back in the old days, they didn't know anything about science and they did these ridiculously dangerous things. But maybe the fact is that today we think we believe in science, but we have a lot of mythological beliefs that make us just alarmed about things that aren't even that alarming. And I was saying, when I was a kid, I was given a little cup of mercury to play with.
Yeah,
which I thought that seems like ridiculous, but some of the more scientific types, or they seem scientific in the comments, were acting like, actually, that's not that dangerous.
I remember when I don't know, I was 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there, for Halloween, my brother and I and a friend of ours all dressed up like devils, and we had actual, these plastic pitchforks. And it turned out, we started, of course, having pitchfork fights. And my brother got beamed in the head with a pitchfork and got a huge gash, cut his head, right open. And turns out that these plastic pitchforks were really not only hard, they didn't have no give to them, but they were really sharp. I mean, I think there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on when we were kids, and now most toys are likely to give you carpal tunnel syndrome because you're playing video games most of the time.
Yeah. That's the real danger, is putting people on the computers and the video games and letting that just restructures your whole brain.
I think that's right, and I think it's funny. It's also restructuring society. I mean, young people. I grew up, watching a lot of TV, and it's amazing to me how young people now are watching so much less TV,
right? Because
they're all playing video games, or hanging out on their computers. But the 18 to 30-year-old demographic for television producers, for television networks, is just the male ones just vanishing, and it's the first time, because there's been this structural permanence of what it means to be young for a long time now, sort of like from the the early 60s through the mid-90s, there was, all young people spent too much time watching TV. That was, TV's going to rot your brain, and now that's sort of going.
I think there's just some elemental need to look at something that glows at night, and in the old days we evolved looking at a fire.
Yeah.
And then the TV took the place of a fire, and so you look at a glowing screen, and then the computer actually just beat out the TV for the glowing thing that you stare at night. Yeah,
although I will say, I've always argued that if you don't watch television passively, if you watch it actively, you try to sort of engage it and figure out how the story's going to go. I can watch a sitcom I've never seen before, watch a minute of it, and tell you almost always how it's going to end. Mm-hmm. But I do think that video games, especially the new ones, which I'm not familiar enough with, and I'm sort of ashamed as a geek about it, that's very active. And so this idea that necessarily simply playing video games rots your brain, I'm not sure it flies. I think we're still going to produce a lot of smart kids who don't read enough books. It's true that kids don't read enough books.
It has become very hard for people to read books now. And I think, I know for me that reading things online just makes me, I used to not want to read things on the screen, and then over the last 3 years of blogging, I've just gotten so that things that aren't on the screen, I just I feel like my brain has been restructured so that there's something that really seduces you and affects you deeply.
Yeah, I still hate reading on screen. I hate reading on screen. I still do.
Just wait. You haven't become the true blogger until you feel like you have to be looking at the screen all the time.
Since we were talking about TV from the early 1960s, you want to talk about
Hanna-Barbera?
Hanna-Barbera.
Joseph Barbera died, and he kind of innovated the idea of why bother to draw cartoons well? Just make them crude. Just get them out there and concentrate maybe on the writing. Not that the writing was that good. There was also a writer from the J. Ward Productions that did Rocky and Bullwinkle. Mm-hmm. I think his last name was Hayward. But he was one of the writers. I think they did a better job with the writing. But I think we see that today with The Simpsons and South Park, that the emphasis is on the writing and getting the good stories, and that it's okay to just have completely crude drawings. So it's part of the great television tradition of Joseph Barbera to just go ahead and make crude drawings and just get your stories out there, and that's TV.
Yeah, I agree there's a lot there, but one place I sort of object is that, and I think this isn't so much intentional as just sort of dealing with reality, is that when I was a kid, when you were a kid, there were basically, 3 or 4 television channels. Mm-hmm. And, it was when I was sort of just in preteen when, cable started coming in, you got more channels. But you used to have this common culture, which I think had a lot of faults, especially in terms of, elite media and all the rest. But one of the benefits it had was that cartoons had to work on a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. And so Bugs Bunny, for example, is hilarious to 50-year-olds, the early ones, is hilarious to 50-year-olds, and it's hilarious to 5-year-olds. And you get this in some movies.
They still do that with movies. Usually just putting in stupid jokes that adults get.
Yeah, like The Incredibles, Shrek, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You still find it in the theater, but cartoons for kids, they're really pretty stupid. Most of them, or they're inappropriate. The Simpsons, I love The Simpsons. My daughter's 3. She sometimes sees me watching The Simpsons, and I'll let her watch a little bit unless I know it's one that she shouldn't see. Mm-hmm. The Simpsons is not really appropriate for little kids in a way that Bugs Bunny was. And, I mean, Hanna-Barbera, there's so much there. There's a real wide range of quality there. I mean, some of those,
Some of it was unbelievable junk.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was really crappy, and a lot of it was really good.
I mean, I wouldn't be too nostalgic about the old... Well, I am nostalgic about the TV from the 50s and 60s, which I grew up with, but a lot of it was really, really crap. It was just mind-numbing. It was awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot more choice now, and having DVDs and so forth, and video, and video games and things like that. I think it's a lot better now. I mean,
I tend to agree. I think television itself is vastly superior than it's ever been. I mean, if you say over the last 10 years, the quality of just American television is so much better than the golden age. But what you do lose is that sort of, and I think it is a real loss, and it comes with creative destruction to capitalism and all the rest. Is what you do lose is that common culture thing. I mean, there is something nice to be said for a TV show that an entire family can sit down and watch, and there's less and less of that. I love Sopranos. I love The Wire. I mean, there are a lot of shows I think are great, but they're more for grown-ups, and that's nice, and I wouldn't want to give them up, but it would be nice if there was more, if we could have a couple I Love Lucys, and I don't think they're out there.
Yeah. Well, those were innocent. I sort of think it's nice that there was this sort of the early history of TV kind of set a tradition up that later shows sort of played off of, and they always had to sort of step it up and make it a little more daring, a little more outrageous.
Yeah.
And there's certain standard moves that are made, making it more about sex or more about violence. And, you can't repeat the early days when things were just getting started and everything was new.
Right.
Now they have to step it up some way, and there's almost no way to really do that.
Right.
Although the toys are getting blander. There were more exciting toys back then, like chemistry sets and things like that. And
yeah.
So, let's see. Are we out of subjects?
Well, we were going to talk about. I mean, we could jerry-rig this and talk about toys for 2 more seconds and talk about toy robots so we can get into robot rights.
Oh, we were going to talk about robot rights. So I guess the ultimate toy is a robot.
Right.
And at some point, the robot is so much like a person that maybe it's wrong to treat it like a slave.
I think that, well, I mean...
and the British government put out a report,
right,
and
the
some have a speculative
the
report that by the middle of the century, this will actually be a real problem the government will have to deal with.
I think it's cool. I think it's fun to talk about. I think it is a colossal waste of taxpayer dollars that they actually had government employees spending a lot of time thinking about this.
I don't know why the government had to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there are futurist operations that are so into this stuff. But it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously, it will track the animal rights argument in a lot of ways. But I think what's interesting about it is how, again, this is all very fanciful, but how it will differentiate, because the animal rights argument is grounded in their feelings, their sensations of pain, loss, that kind of thing. And I think it's absurd to say that animals have the same feelings as humans. They have some of the same feelings as humans, but they don't have empathy. They don't have guilt the way that humans do. They don't have a conscience the way that humans do, although I'd say my dog is an exception. And but what will be interesting is that on the robot side is that it'll have nothing to do with their feelings.
It'll have to do with us.
It'll have to do with us, and it has to do with their intelligence. It'll have to do with sentience, but not about, whether they feel agony or something, or whether it's cruel to them. It'll have to do with whether or not they can beat us at chess and whether they can have conversations.
It might have to do with the fact that they're so smart that we would have to respect them.
Right.
But it might have to do with the fact that even though they don't have feelings and they don't have a soul, that we have feelings, and if we treat something that looks that human as if it was just a machine, that it would undermine our moral core.
Right. I mean, but that's a
like
distinct...
torturing your dolls. Like if you had a bunch of dolls that you tortured, that would be bad about you, even though the dolls couldn't feel anything, right? Right.
But I mean, it seems to me the distinction I always draw with the animals thing is that you can certainly make the case that humans, because they are humans, have obligations to animals. That we have an obligation as human beings not to be unnecessarily cruel to animals. That doesn't mean that animals have rights in the classical sense, and it's a weird leap.
Right, packaging it as rights is a little absurd, but I think as a moral or ethical question, it's important.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fascinating thing.
I mean, because what would happen when people think of robots that you can make do whatever you want, one of the main things people think about is that you could have sex with them. You could make this beautiful robot who would do everything that you want, and then you could do anything you wanted to it, right?
Right.
What would that do to human beings if we could all have a robot that would serve all our sexual needs in some perfect way?
I
mean, wouldn't that ruin something about human life in some horrible way? I don't know how rights are going to solve that problem, but isn't that a looming disaster for humanity?
I don't know if it's a limit. I mean, you're sounding very conservative here. I mean, people like Virginia Postrel and Ron Bailey would say you're wrong.
Would say, get me that robot right away. I need that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this. I mean, there's always been this tension about technology liberating individuals to the point where they don't need to subscribe to conventions and norms and all the rest. And I think it's a real tension. I agree with you. I think it's too soon to predict how that tension can or should be resolved. I mean, it's like in Star Trek, you have the holodeck, and I've been asking this question for years: is if you cheat on your wife in the holodeck, is it adultery, or is it just masturbation? And there are a lot of interesting things.
Some people think masturbation is cheating.
Some people do.
I guess you don't want to validate that traditionalist conservative position. I take it.
I think I don't even want to address that. I think that is too fraught with peril to enter into unthinkingly. But I mean, I think if that is
see, this is you care about how things play out in the real world. The attraction of abstract ideas is not that strong. There are some things where reality is going to overshadow your principles.
I agree, but I think we have a little time before we have perfect animatronic sex robots. And my
point is coming, right?
I agree, it's coming. But I mean, my point was simply that I think that is something that if you subscribe to a tradition, religious or otherwise, if you subscribe to a code that says masturbation is cheating on your wife, then you've got your own issues with it. I would certainly never want to codify in law those kinds of rules. The question is whether we would codify in law banning having sex with robots. We have it, I believe it's against the law to have sex with animals in a lot of places.
Right.
So it'll be interesting.
And I assume the libertarians say that that's ridiculous.
My guess is that libertarians would be mixed on that. Some would say it's an animal welfare issue. But if you say it's just pure property, then my guess is they would have no problem with it. But I think it'd be interesting to get the different reactions. But with robots, I can't imagine they would have a problem with it. I mean, why on earth would they argue that you can't do whatever you want with your own inanimate, property?
I mean, I think it's a matter of law. I don't have a problem with that, but I think just on the moral level. For example, if you're in a dream, if you're in one of those lucid dreams, where it's a dream,
right?
Are you allowed to just rape people in your dream?
Well, allowed.
Isn't that wrong? I mean, shouldn't you, if you realize this is a dream and you can do whatever you want, shouldn't you say, but I can't misuse these people even though I know they're not real people?
I think. Well, I mean, I think. I mean, it's an interesting way of putting it, because I think this is one of the places where secular language and secular constructs really kind of fail to deal adequately with the complexity of the human condition. Because religious language would say you're sinning in your heart. You're sinning in your thought. And the language of sin, I mean, Andrew Dobanko writes some great stuff on this. The language of sin and of evil is fairly desiccated, I think, in sort of liberal secular culture. We don't have good vocabulary for it. A lot of people, turn off the safeties on their rifles when they hear very moralistic language. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, this has sort of been the project of the secular left for a very long time, is to sort of develop a morality bereft of traditional religion, which is why I do think there's a war on Christmas, by the way, because that's part of that project, is to purge the public space of traditional religious stuff and replace it with new sort of secular religious icons and constructs and concepts of like diversity is now a holy of holies and all the rest. Anyway, it's an interesting stuff. I would love to revisit the rights of robots, but I do think we are now out of time.
Did we use up the time?
We are at 50 minutes.
Okay. I had to put my glasses on to see what the number is. Oh, yes, we're about at 50, so that's... That looks pretty good. So you want to say Merry Christmas, or you want to say Happy Hanukkah? Or can I just say, I hate the expression season's greetings. That's the worst of them. Happy Holidays is one thing, but I wish people wouldn't say season's greetings, because it's always a season. You could say, is it hot enough for you in the middle of the summer, and that would be season's greetings, right?
Right. I mean, I grew up I was raised Jewish, but my mom was Christian, and we always had a thing on our Christmas tree. It was a cutout Christmas tree ornament, cardboard ornament with a headline from the Daily News that said, "Santa knows we're Jewish." So I have no problem saying Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, and I suppose Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Although I have some problems with Kwanzaa, but we can do that for another Blogging Heads.
Let's celebrate the solstice. Is that today?
Oh, it is. Today's the shortest day of the year.
Yeah. I mean, that's profound.
And in Madison, it must be getting dark already.
It's raining. Well, we're not. We're having a little global warming event out here. It's been raining. There's no snow. I've been here for 20 years without missing a white Christmas, but this time it's going to be rain.
Huh.
So.
All right, so do we need to do a 3, 2, 1 click again?
No, I think we just need to say, that's it. Goodbye, right. And see you later. It
was lovely meeting you last week in Chicago, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Let's not be enemies. I think we could form an alliance.
I don't want to be enemies. I wasn't looking to create enemies.
Okay, well, just be careful. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.